I don't know what happened, but here we are. Like I said, we're going to keep going no matter what. But anyway, as I was saying, my goal with this YouTube channel is to build community. I really, I'm not in this to win the best YouTuber award. I'm not in this to, I'm in this to build community. I mean, if you read my book, BreadTube Serves Imperialism, the book was almost an advertisement for the Center for Political Innovation. I put the manifesto of the Center for Political Innovation at the end of the book. And I am here trying to build a community. I am trying to build an organization. I'm trying to build a community. Not trying to build a political party. I'm trying to build a think tank. Trying to build a community. If someone can take the link and post this in the other chat and bring folks back, that would be great. I don't know what happened, but we just have to keep going, right? It's very frustrating. But that is the goal here. I am trying to build a community. That is what I aim to do. And I'm trying to compromise with people. I'm trying to bring people together. I'm trying to bring people together who disagree. When I was in Nicaragua, I was talking with the Nicaraguans, and, it was really special. It was really special. And I don't know if I should say this or not, but, I talked to the Nicaraguans and I said, our organization, the Center for Political Innovation, is very unique. It's very unique. I said because, on the one hand, I have a trans person sitting next to me. On the other hand, I have a conservative Roman Catholic sitting next to me. But we're in the same organization, believing in socialism, believing in Marxism. And they said that is really a special thing. You don't see that in the United States. But, I'm here. I'm Caleb. On the one side of me at the table is a trans woman. On the other side of me at the table is a conservative Roman Catholic farmer from Illinois. And both of them are dedicated to the group. Both of them were full-time John Brown volunteers. Both of them, despite disagreeing on a number of things, they were in the same organization, in the same political grouping, committed to the same projects. They traveled with me to the same country. I mean, this is something special. This is what real socialist movements do, right? This is what real socialist movements do, right? They have people from different walks of life, different walks of life brought together to serve a common purpose. That is what real socialist movements do. Socialism is not a commodified identity. You're not supposed to wake up in the morning and put on some socialist shoes, drive a socialist car to work, tell all your coworkers that it's not like that, right? This isn't like being a punk rocker. It's not like being a goth. It's not like being it's not that at all. It's about building a community, because ultimately that's what socialism is all about. Capitalism creates a situation where the wealth increasingly centralizes in the hands of a few. A small group of people who own the banks, factories, and industries get wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. And in the process, they drive the wages of the workers down. They seek to eliminate the worker from the assembly line to maximize their own profits, right? They drive overproduction, right? And they create a situation where fewer and fewer workers are employed, and they stand outcast and starving mid the wonders they have made. They increasingly drive the proletariat into poverty to maximize their profits. This is the situation where increasingly the working class is cast out. Have you seen these homeless encampments out in California? It's way more than Skid Row. These homeless encampments, I saw just a little bit of it when I was out in Los Angeles. Unbelievable. These homeless encampments, and we have them here in New York City now. All kinds of people that have been outcast and starving. And you think about these people who've been outcast and starving. These are the people that built America. America was not built by Rockefeller. It wasn't built by Carnegie and DuPont. America was built by working people who built this country. And yet now we stand outcast and starving mid the wonders that we have made. The capitalist bosses don't have any room for us at the assembly line any longer. And so they're in homeless encampments, and their homes have been foreclosed, and their kids are addicted to opioids. And the homeless encampments are expanding, and the people that are outcast and starving are growing. right? And the number of people who don't have a place in this system, who don't have a place in this system, the number of young people, in their 20s and 30s stuck living with their parents because this system can't provide them with a job in which they can support themselves and go out on their own and start their own family. This is a crime. But what happens? What happens as a result of when all this happens? Well, what happens? Well, the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx says, the working people form combinations. What is a combination? It's an organization. They start to care for each other. They build communities. They come together. That's the only way human beings can survive, is with each other. When people are poor, when people are struggling, when they're desperate, they start to need each other. They start to depend on each other. That's why, I think that leftists ranting against the family is a stupid line, right? Now, it's one thing to talk about the oppression of women, which is very important. It's one thing to talk about the right of LGBT people to have their family the way they want to have it, with 2 moms and 2 dads. That's fine with me. But when we say that we're against the family, that might work among middle-class folks, the suburban, teenagers. Vosh, he probably loves that. Yeah, I don't want my mom and dad to tell me what to do. I just want their money. Yeah, I can see Vosh. Vosh probably loves Destroy the Family, right? He'll never have to clean his room again. But among working people, you can't be against the family. Because among working people who are struggling, the family is very important. When people are poor, they learn to depend on each other. They learn to depend on each other. They need each other. They need their community. And it's very important. So we shouldn't rant against the family. And when people are struggling, when they are outcast and starving mid the wonders they have made, when the capitalist system has no room for them at the assembly line anymore, when people are desperate, connections, relationships, those things are so important. So important. So important. But the capitalists very much don't want that. The capitalists very much want us all to be atomized individuals. They want us all to be isolated. They want us all to be on our own. Why? So we're easier to control. Right? If you're an atomized individual, you don't have a community to be part of, you don't have an identity to cling to, you don't have beliefs to fight for, you're just a liberal, atomized individual doing your own thing, man. If that's what you are, they can roll right over you. They can roll right over you. There's an old Union song, right? What is it? Step by step, the longest march can be won. Many stones can form an arch, but singly none. And by union, what we will can be accomplished still. Drops of water turn a mill. This is the understanding. When working people are desperate and they start to bond with each other, and they start to build communities, suddenly they start to build a block. They start to build a block, and that block is powerful. And it's those blocks, those unions, those combinations, those associations, those Soviets, those workers' councils, those Bolivarian circles, those citizens' power councils. That's what gives real strength. The block. When people stand arm in arm, when they bond together, when they find a way to work with each other, when they find a way to accept each other, when they get over their racism and their homophobia, when they get over their sexism, when men can stand behind powerful women, when people that said I would never associate with a gay person or a trans person say, you know what, we're on the same side in this struggle, and they get over their homophobia or their transphobia. Right? When white and black stand together, when white workers say that they're going to fight for the rights of black people, right? When all of these divisions, these artificial divisions the capitalists have created, when this desire to just be your own individual, to think that you're all on your own is broken down, when people form a block That block that they form is unstoppable. It's unstoppable. And that is what the capitalists are very afraid of. They're always trying to cultivate this extreme individualism on your part because they are afraid of this block emerging. This is what they're afraid of. This is really what they're afraid of. And on the right, they're pushing libertarianism and the Ayn Rand stuff. On the left, it's identitarianism, it's, SJW and all of this. But they're afraid of blocks being formed. That's what they're afraid of. They're afraid of a block being formed. And that's what, that corny, silly Canadian song, "The Party is the Most Precious Thing," is trying to get at, right? Spread the party's seed in every factory, multiply her ranks relentlessly, stand strong in her defense against the enemy, because the party is the most precious thing. That's what it's getting at. That's what it's getting at. That's what the solidarity forever is all about, right? When the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. But what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? But the union makes us strong. That's what it's getting at. That's what it's getting at. But if you want to be in a group of people, if you want to cooperate in a group of people, you have to humble yourself. It requires humbling yourself. You have to shed some of your pride. You have to be willing to get up and say, "I made a mistake." You have to be able to get up and say, "You know what? I don't necessarily want to do this. This isn't how I want to spend my Saturday morning. This isn't how I want to spend my Friday afternoon. This isn't how I want to spend, but this is what I'm committed to. This community and what it stands for, its goals are important." And that's what you have to do. If you're going to be in a group, if you're going to be in an organization, that's what you have to do. You have to be willing. You have to be willing to give of yourself. You have to be willing to make sacrifices. You have to be willing to work with somebody you don't like. You have to be willing to try and find the good in somebody that you find obnoxious. Did you know that? If you're going to be in an organization, at some point you are going to have to work with somebody who is a jackass, who's obnoxious. The second they open their mouth, you're just like, "Shut your mouth, you're an obnoxious person." But it's going to be your job not only to tolerate them, but to find whatever goodness within that person that you can bond with, that you can connect with, to just find it. To find it and bond with it and cultivate it, to find the little bit of good. That's what you're going to have to do. It's not easy. It's not easy to be in an organization. It is not easy to be in an organization. It's not easy to be married, folks. It's not easy to be married. Folks, it's not easy to live in a neighborhood. Folks, it's not easy to work in a workplace or an office with somebody. Getting along with people is hard. It's hard. It's difficult. It is not easy. It's not easy. It's not easy, but it's what gives meaning to life. It's what gives meaning to life. Now, the reason I warned you all that my opening remarks tonight were going to be a little bit longer than usual, and keep the super chats rolling in, folks. Like I said, I'm writing them down, and we'll get to them in the second half of the show, even though the first half might be a little bit longer tonight than usual. I wanted to let you all know. Now, it's a little bit frustrating because we had to start a new stream, but I wrote an article about what the Center for Political Innovation stands for. I wrote it. I was approached by the Platypus Review. Platypus Affiliated Society is this weird, kind of pro-imperialist, Marxist, academic organization. But they took notice of the Center for Political Innovation. I think they saw the Joe Sims of the CPUSA bragging on us, and I think they saw some of my live streams, and they saw this and that, and so they gave me a platform. They gave me a platform to explain what the Center for Political Innovation is. And so, I've been on CNN before. They gave me a platform. I've done interviews with many international TV networks. So, if Platypus Review wants to just give me a platform to explain my views, I may not agree with a lot of things they say about the Iraq War or about whatever, but if they're going to give me a platform, I'll take it. So I actually linked the article below the last stream. Now that we had to open a new stream, this is continued. You don't have the link here, but I got it right in front of me. And so I'm going to read to you, this article about what the Center for Political Innovation stands for. I'm going to read it to you. And then I'll make some final comments. And then at that point, we'll do the roll call, and then I'll answer your questions. So I'm just going to read to you this article called "We Are the City Building Tendency." Here we go. Since the 2008-2009 financial meltdown, interest in socialism, communism, anarchism, and various anti-capitalist theories have been widespread among the U.S. public. However, this has not manifested itself in the revival of the labor movement or the enactment of social democratic reforms. Austerity and the march toward a low-wage police state have continued. Regime change wars and interventions by the Pentagon have continued with even less organized resistance than prior to the financial crash. The various sects whose leadership are veterans of the 1960s and 70s political upsurge remain more isolated than ever. While vague social democratic concepts about free health care and tax the rich have become more popular today, knowledge of actual Marxist theory is noticeably absent. In this context, feelings of opposition to the status quo, the declining economic situation, the wars, and out-of-touch elected officials have been hijacked by the right wing. Populism is considered to be the property of right-wing nationalists, while Marxism is the label put on postmodernists and social justice theoreticians emerging from the Ivy League schools. Any serious socialist should be disturbed by this situation, and I certainly have been for a number of years. The biggest awakening came in October, in Zuccotti Park on October 20th, 2011, the day the gruesome death of Muammar Gaddafi took place. As an activist in the park, I noticed a big gap among the Occupy Wall Street activists. The seasoned left-wing activists, the Trotskyites, the NGO liberals, and the hipster trust fund anarchists seemed to view the destruction of Libya in an almost positive light, as a revolution against a dictator who was violating human rights. But among the Midwestern working-class youth, many of whom had come to New York City with almost nothing, there were very different sentiments. Though these youth were ideologically not left-wing, attracted to a mishmash of libertarianism, pseudo-anarchism, and conspiracy theories, they viewed Gaddafi in a positive light. They praised Gaddafi's efforts to build up an independent African currency, to build the African Union, and to oppose the U.S. war machine around the world. While the decaying Marxist-Leninist sect I was working with was attempting to recruit liberal activists, I began to notice and question the ineffectiveness of this strategy. This forced me to examine my own beliefs, my own motivations, my own ideology, as well as the problems facing the entire leftist milieu in a new light. In Critique of the Goethe Program, Marx explained the material basis for the higher stage of communism, writing, "In the higher phase of communist society, after the enslaving subordination of the individual to the division of labor, and therewith also the antithesis between mental and physical labor, has vanished, after labor has become not only a means of life, but life's prime want, after the productive forces have also increased with the all-around development of the individual, and all the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly, only then can the narrow horizon of bourgeois right be crossed in its entirety, and society inscribe on its banners, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs." In essence, Marx is explaining what historical materialism so brilliantly lays out in a way all other analysis cannot. Class society, social hierarchies, the state itself are all rooted in scarcity. In a society without the all-around development of the individual, where the productive forces and technological progress of human beings is restrained by the irrationality of profits in command, much of the ugliness of the contemporary world becomes unavoidable. However, Marxism argues that with central planning of the means of production, a post-scarcity society, of vast abundance and egalitarianism can emerge. As Engels explained in Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, socialized production upon a predetermined plan becomes henceforth possible. The development of production makes the existence of different classes of society thenceforth an anachronism. In proportion as anarchy and social production vanishes, the political authority of the state dies out. Man, at last, the master of his own form of social organization, becomes at the same time lord over nature, his own master, free. As Lenin explained, monopolies, oligarchy, the striving for domination and not for freedom, the exploitation of an increasing number of small or weak nations by a handful of the richest and most powerful nations, all of these have given birth to the distinctive characteristics of imperialism, which compels us to define it as parasitic, decaying capitalism. The essence of Lenin's concept of imperialism as the highest stage of capitalism is that development is being restrained. The world is being kept poor, so the cartels of Wall Street and London finance, and in our age, the Malthusian social engineers of Silicon Valley, can stay rich. However, when countries have ripped free from the monopolistic domination of Western cartels and reorganized their economies, huge successes have resulted. Socialism in the 20th century, despite the flaws and setbacks, demonstrated very clearly that it is capable of rapidly advancing technological progress and development. Russia was an agrarian, impoverished society in 1917, with state central planning, mobilizing the country around 5-year plans, overcoming the artificial restraints imposed by the market. The USSR wiped out illiteracy, fully electrified, defeated the Nazi invaders, and conquered outer space. The first mobile phone was patented in the Soviet Union in 1957. Despite a NATO treaty barring the USSR from getting access to high technology, crippling economic warfare, and military threat, a home computer system was developed, and all kinds of amazing technological and scientific breakthroughs took place in the Soviet society up into the 1980s. With a communist party in power, state-run industries and banks, along with 5-year plans and heavy control over the private sector, China has emerged to become the second largest economy in the world. With socialism, China has built the largest telecommunications manufacturer, the largest steel industry, the largest hydroelectric power plant in the world, as well as the fastest trains on the planet. Millions have been raised from poverty, access to education has vastly expanded, and technological achievements and breakthroughs are numerous. Socialism created a healthcare system in Cuba, which is admired all over the world for its achievements. Socialism in Bolivia created the highest GDP growth rates in South America, consistently, while paving the roads and wiping out illiteracy. Quality modern housing has been brought to even the poorest Venezuelans. Nicaraguan socialism has eradicated illiteracy and enabled thousands of indigenous people to become micro-entrepreneurs. With socialism, Libya was the top oil exporting country in Africa prior to 2011. It had the highest life expectancy according to the CIA World Factbook, and it has constructed the world's largest irrigation system. No horror story of Gaddafi's atrocities, alleged or truthful, can obscure this economic reality. While capitalism, and more recently neoliberal economic reforms, have left countries across Africa, Central America, and the Caribbean in crippling poverty, socialism turned Russia and China into industrial powerhouses and global superpowers. The endless browbeating of the claim that socialism never worked, communism completely failed, is an effort to obscure, on the basis of human rights violations, atrocities, and selectively highlighted episodes of mismanagement, the overall obvious reality. Socialism works, and when countries break free from the imperialist global order, their achievements are significant. This should be no surprise to those who study Marx and Lenin and what they actually wrote. However, if one listens to the prevailing leftist voices in the Western world, it is highly confusing. The vision of a high-tech, post-scarcity world where human beings live out their full potential, what some have called a resource-based economy, is now considered largely the property of libertarians and other elements who worship the profit motive. Oh, did someone send me a super chat there? Did I miss a super chat? Okay. Books exposing anti-communists. The spirit of growth and optimism observed in the Soviet Union by Anna Louise Strong, H.G. Wells, Sidney and Beatrice Webb, W.E.B. Du Bois, Albert Einstein, and so many other intellectuals is now associated with the right wing and advocates of the free market. Meanwhile, many leftists now focus on the idea that capitalism is bad because it increases consumption. Capitalism is associated with, quote, buying stuff and destroying the environment. Leftism is associated with anti-consumerism and the notion that working people in this world should be poorer. Anti-imperialism has been consumed by a narrative best articulated in the Hollywood film Avatar. David Brooks summed it up in the New York Times as the oft-repeated story about a manly young adventurer who goes into the wilderness in search of thrills and profit. But once there, he meets the native people and finds they are noble and spiritual and pure, and so he emerges as their messiah, leading them in a righteous crusade against his own rotten civilization. In this new narrative that dominates leftism, imperialism is not bad because it holds back economic development, but rather because it brings it, tearing down beautiful primitive peoples away from their spiritually pure ways. The reason leftism has failed to capture the anger of the U.S. working class in a time of economic crisis is simple. Leftists no longer seek to improve their living conditions, but rather want to reduce them in the name of anti-consumerism and environmentalism. The reason leftists have been some of the most enthusiastic supporters of regime change wars and destabilization in Syria, Libya, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Russia, and China is because leftism no longer seeks to liberate the developing world from underdevelopment. Leftist narratives now celebrate the Dalai Lama, Wahhabi fanatics, the small minority of indigenous peoples in South and Central America who reject technology, and other groups deemed to be, quote, noble savages in the white savior fantasy of the ultra-rich. The enemy of such forces is, of course, the authoritarian Marxist regimes that build schools, hospitals, and power plants. How on earth did anti-consumerism replace the struggle to raise productive forces and living standards with society controlling the means of production? Best books. How on earth? How on earth did the struggle to liberate the developing world from the monopolistic domination and forced poverty at the hands of Western finance get replaced with notions similar to Mother Teresa's sickening mantra of poverty is beautiful? The answer can be found in Lenin's analysis of the roots of social chauvinism, in the ideological confusion following the fall of the Soviet Union. But one factor that cannot be overlooked is the direct intervention of the Western intelligence apparatus. The Congress for Cultural Freedom program of the CIA is now a matter of public record. Nominally left publications such as Partisan Review, Der Monat, Encounter, Paris Review, and others were funded by the CIA along with the Ford Foundation and Rockefeller Foundations. They highlighted the work of Susan Sontag, Irving Howe, Hannah Arendt, Mary McCarthy, and others. They reinvented leftist thought to be an expression of middle-class alienation and pessimism that labels all populism as fascist. The so-called left is a synthetic creation that accompanied the promotion of narcotics with Project MKUltra, the utilization of various Eastern religious cults as proxy forces, and various other criminal activities conducted by U.S. intelligence agencies. The way U.S. culture was reinvented during the 1960s and 70s was not merely the result of progressive anti-racist struggles and opposition to Cold War conformity, but also the result of sinister efforts to confuse the public and lessen the danger of a real anti-capitalist movement emerging within the United States. While it is an absolute taboo to discuss in leftist circles, these are facts that any serious socialist must acknowledge. The infiltration, manipulation, subsidization of what calls itself left-wing in the United States has taken a huge ideological toll. And as a result, socialism in the U.S. is in shambles, as a few pieces of confused, common-turn wreckage scream at a much bigger layer of foundation-funded chaos worshippers, middle-class academic antisocial elements. The broad masses of working-class Americans see their living standards falling and are open to anti-capitalist notions, but they look at the destructive entity called the left, and they want no part of it. They cannot be blamed or morally shamed for doing so. Now, it may be tempting to become ideologically dogmatic and attempt to restore a more pure interpretation of Marxism in light of contemporary distortions, but that would also be a mistake. The Soviet Union collapsed because it could not effectively adjust its socialism in the way countries like Vietnam, Cuba, and China have. 20th century socialist countries often fell into the trap of attempting to build a totally egalitarian society in a state of underdevelopment and poverty, having disastrous consequences, as seen in China's Cultural Revolution, Pol Pot's democratic Kampuchea, and to a lesser degree in many other places. But the truth that Marx laid out in the Critique of the Goethe Program is that the entire basis, and thank you, Gleb, for the super chat, the entire basis of the communist project is unleashing human creativity and development. According to Engels, this is the very essence of human beings. The animal merely uses its environment and brings about changes in it simply by his presence. Man, by his changes, makes it serve his ends and masters it. This is the final essential distinction between man and other animals. And once again, it is labor that brings about this distinction. The Center for Political Innovation is not a new Marxist party. Democratic centralism in the United States has resulted in creating a number of irrelevant sects, none of which can truly call themselves a party in any sense and any force worthy of the label. The Center for Political Innovation does not seek to become the new vanguard or leader of the movement. Rather, the Center for Political Innovation is an educational project aiming to get out of the movement and to the masses. The goals are twofold. One, to propose a series of economic and political reforms that would challenge corporate power and force those who support these demands into confrontation with the profit-centered economic system and its global dominance. Two, to teach genuine, constructive, anti-imperialist, optimistic, scientific socialism to all who want to learn about it, facilitating debate and discussion among serious professional worker politicians about the concepts and ideology that can lead beyond capitalism and imperialism. We should not be afraid to question aspects of Marxist theory in order to develop socialism for our time. The anti-imperialist and socialist movements have changed a lot since the Cold War. Outside of China, much of the socialist and Marxist-led movements have embraced religious faith, most especially in Latin America. Baathism, socialism with Chinese characteristics, the anti-capitalism of Shia Muslims in the Middle East, African socialism, and Bolivarianism all reinvented socialism for their own particular country and unique circumstances. Serious revolutionaries in the United States should be actively determining how this can be done here and what will ultimately be the nature of socialism with American characteristics. Marx's ending to the Communist Manifesto contains the following instructions. In short, the communists everywhere support every revolutionary movement against the existing social and political order of things. In all these movements, they bring to the front, as the leading question in each, the property question, no matter what its degree of development at the time. Americans who are angry about losing their jobs, seeing their communities destroyed by opioids, their children locked in prison for profit, and their relatives sent off to die in foreign wars, should be confronted with the property question. It should be made clear that instead of a weak corporate regime that presides over gradually collapsing the U.S. into just another trading outpost in a global low-wage empire, another option exists. The U.S. could instead have a government of action that fights for working families. Such a government would mobilize popular power and restructure the U.S. economy to serve public good, putting banking and natural resources under public ownership and management while enacting an economic Bill of Rights for the population. It would see the population not as a dangerous horde to be managed, but as a reservoir of potential to be unleashed toward building a post-scarcity world freedom of abundance, freedom, and equality. Amid the ideological confusion and increasing hopelessness of U.S. society, we consider ourselves to represent the city-building tendency within the human species, and our roots go much deeper than Marx. Socrates, Confucius, Christ, Caesar, Spartacus, and so many other courageous, progressive individuals have given their lives to advancing humanity toward a higher state of being. We are an association of like-minded thinkers and dedicated agitators, cooperating in different ways in different communities across the country. Those aligned with us deliver bottled water to impoverished families and the elderly in Texas. They clean graveyards, operate within church congregations, on college campuses, in workplaces, and in neighborhoods. We distribute buttons that say "Cancel Student Debt" in New York City parks. We conduct regular reading groups in Chicago and California. We travel to anti-imperialist countries. We appear on international television. We hold debates with political opponents. We publish books, and much more. Our goal is to help every participant in our project to discover what their own unique contribution can be when taking up history's challenge. We want you to fulfill your potential as a revolutionary, and our organization exists not to hold you back and glorify our leaders, but to unleash you to your highest possible achievement. We reject left adventurism, and like all responsible revolutionary organizers, we advocate a peaceful democratic transition to socialism. We recognize that as capitalism enters a crisis, the ruling classes often move to abolish democratic rights in order to preserve their power. We recognize the right of the people to defend their organizations and communities in such a context. However, we are absolutely clear that we want peace and stability, not chaos. It is capitalism that is destroying the United States of America, and socialism will rescue it, rebuilding the country on new foundations, overcoming the legacy of colonialism, slavery, and many other crimes that hang over this society as a curse. The Center for Political Innovation, its youth organization, Students and Youth for a New America, and its cadre outreach team, the John Brown Volunteers, are open to engaging with all who are willing to discuss and wrangle with how this important project can be carried out. It is in this spirit of open debate and seeking to forge groundbreaking discourse that this article has been submitted to the Platypus Review. And that was my article explaining what the Center for Political Innovation is all about. That was my article. And I want to just say one last thing. Sorry that I have this screen here. Just one last thing. One last thing. Which is this. Vladimir Lenin, he had a very, very famous story that was his favorite story to tell when explaining the actions of the Bolsheviks. And this is the story that he would tell. He would tell the story of a group of peasants. There were a group of peasants, and they were walking through the countryside. They were walking, there were a bunch of fields around them, and up on a hill, they saw a house. And outside the house, there was a man. And the man was waving his arms crazily, just waving his arms around. And they thought, man, that man must be having an epileptic fit. You know, that man must be rabid. He must have rabies or something. What in the world is that man doing? And there was just this man up on the hill waving his arms around, looking like a crazy lunatic. Like a crazy lunatic. But when they got closer to the man, they saw that he wasn't looking crazy. He wasn't looking crazy at all. He was sharpening a knife. When you sharpen a knife, you have to wave your arm. But in reality, it looked insane. It looked erratic. But in reality, his actions were very rational. His actions were extremely rational. They made perfect sense. But from a distance, they looked crazy. From a distance, they looked crazy. But in reality, his actions were completely rational. And Lenin would tell that story to explain how the Bolsheviks operated before the Russian Revolution. Because to an average person, the Bolsheviks looked insane. Please have that printed as a pamphlet, says Don Deering. We will. We definitely will. But to the average person, from a distance, it looked insane. But it was actually very rational. Now, obviously, that was Lenin's favorite story because he was explaining how the Bolsheviks would make clear that even though it looked crazy, and even though what they're doing didn't seem to have immediate results, even though what they were aiming to accomplish, it didn't always seem to have a quick payout, at the end of the day, they were sharpening their knives, and they ultimately took power. And Lenin would make that analogy many times. He told that story over and over and over again. It was his favorite story. Now, it's not a good story to use in our time because generally people don't sharpen their own knives in the same way. We don't have peasants, up on hills and people walking through the countryside. So it's a little bit of an outdated analogy. It's from Russia in, the early 1900s. But there's an old prayer that is used in some Christian congregations that basically expresses the same thing. I don't know if you've ever heard it. I think it's used by some Southern Baptists, but it's basically expressing the same thing. And the old prayer goes something like this. It's, God, I hate flour. I hate flour. God, I hate water. I hate water. God, I hate baking soda. I hate baking soda. God, I hate shortening. I hate shortening. God, I hate ovens. I hate ovens. But if you put them all together, I sure love fresh biscuits. And that kind of explains it. You might hate working with somebody. You might hate Zoom conference calls that seem like they're never going to end. You might hate selling, buttons and handing out stuff in the rain. You might hate having to engage with people that are backward and conservative. You might hate having to lug your stuff across the country. You might hate having to negotiate, an agreement with somebody who's politically different than you. You might absolutely despise having to go carry big heavy boxes. You might despise it all. But at the end of the day, you're gonna love the fresh biscuits. At the end of the day, you're gonna love the fresh biscuits. Because drops of water turn a mill. And what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? But the union makes us strong. And the party is the most precious thing. And if we don't have community, we have nothing. And that concludes my opening remarks for tonight. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, and let's do the roll call. Let's do the roll call. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you. Then I'll start answering your super chat questions. Names and locations. Jeff in Nicaragua. Christian in northern New Jersey. Zachary Bunch in Richmond, Virginia. Carolyn and Dario from Brooklyn. Rice in Adelaide, Australia. West Virginia. JT24 in Mississippi. Mo in Toronto, Canada. Micah in Las Vegas. Robert in Hawaii. Ryan in Oakland. Wisconsin. Tristan in Maryland. Nate in Chicago. Cleveland Pirate Alex. Tristan, shout out to you, by the way. Clydebank, James Graham in Clydebank. Tulare, California. Neil Fraser in Hong Kong. Shout out to you. He says, thanks, Zachary. Oz Whistles, Red Precarian, Ramsey, Cincinnati. Rougemont, North Carolina. Springfield, Missouri. Ash in Chicago. Greg in Hong Kong, China. Jenna Sullivan in Connecticut. Theo in Pennsylvania. Char Darling is out in San Angelo. John Whitty is in Houston. Max the Sax is in D.C. Good stuff. Lockport, New York is with us. Andy in New Zealand. Sam from Missouri. Kieran from San Diego. Mike in North Carolina. Los Angeles. Eddie from Indonesia. Nazaire from West Covina, California. Olympia, Washington. Grand Junction, Colorado. Shia from Montreal. Kendall in San Diego. Temple City. Balthazar in Oakland. San Miguel from Mexico. Richard in Tacoma. Don D out in NYC. We need to get together, you and me, Don D. We're going to get together pretty soon. We've been meaning to get together for so long. Sean in Phoenix. Tara Hoot, that's in Indiana. Reno in Nevada. Bolton, England. Up the John Brown Volunteers. Thank you very much. Saludos. Joe Gale in Nassau County. We love you, Joe Gale. I think we're getting together next week, too, if possible. Neil Fraser in Hong Kong, China. Saw you. Hope you saw my second super chat. Did I miss a super chat here? Did I miss a super chat? Go rolling back. Oh, yeah. Excellent analysis. We all know the capitalist class will not go down. What do you think? Revolutionary. Okay. All right. Revolutionary violence inevitable. Violence inevitable. All right, we're writing it down. All right, and was there another super chat? I listened to your article, Caleb. That is great writing. Thank you for sharing it. You're very welcome, Red Precarian. You're very, very welcome. All right, speed up. I don't want to miss any super chats. Chaya from Montreal, Joe Gale, Nassau County, Jordan in Indiana, Rocky Mountains, Carmen from Reading, Pennsylvania, Auckland, New Zealand, Uruguay, Mohsen from Iran, Michigan, Chicago, Smedley Butler. That's Jason Hunt. Shout out to you, Jason. Herb Bryant in Florida. Shout out to you, Herb. Great member of this community. Nazgul from Morador. My Pillow Guy Basement. My Pillow. Right? What's he up to these days? Jeff in Lindsay, Canada. Boulder. Alex Gunn in Boulder. Dan Keating out there in New Jersey. Shout out to you, Dan. Shout out to you. Jeff in Detroit, Michigan is with us. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Steve in Southwest Michigan. St. Louis. Good stuff. Anybody else? Names and locations? All righty. Okay, folks. I'm going to start answering your super chat questions. Keep them rolling in because that's what makes the second half of the show fun. Polls in Russia show the people favor socialism. Well, there's a couple factors there, okay? So first of all, the Soviet Union is viewed very positively among the population. Soviet nostalgia is very high. Many people say that life was better at the time of the Soviet Union. The 1990s, the fall of the Soviet Union was a disaster. It's a pivotal moment in many Russian people's lives. Meanwhile, there's great national pride in defeating the Nazis. Furthermore, the pandemic has exacerbated the gap between the rich and poor, not just in Russia, but all throughout the world. I mean, Russian President Vladimir Putin condemned capitalism in a recent speech, and he talked about how the pandemic has revealed told that the model of capitalism that works in the West, that has been developed in the West, is not working, and the pandemic has laid it out, and that's the Russian president talked about that. Now, you have a very strong Communist Party in Russia. That's the second largest political party in the country after United Russia, and there are a number of other socialist parties in the Russian parliament that have representation. And I would say that, United Russia is not, it's not a Marxist or a communist party, but it's not a free market libertarian party either. They're a party that is, it's more of a nationalist orientation. They want to do what's best for Russia. And if that means government control or if that means foreign investment, that's right, professional managerial class. That's what they're open to. So there you go. There you go. That doesn't surprise me. Look, and in Russia, there is still a lot of government programs. The government directs a lot of the economy. It's mainly the sale of oil and natural gas that subsidizes the state, and the state uses that to subsidize a lot of industries. There's a lot of industry in Russia that is technically private but directed by the state. You can't call Russia a free market society by any means. It's not socialist in the way the Soviet Union was, certainly. And there's a lot of free enterprise in Russia. But it's not a libertarian country by any means. I mean, the government controls the oil and natural gas. The government directs a lot of the industries. Russia is very much a mixed economy. It's actually, they studied Deng Xiaoping theory when they were, reforming the Russian economy, in the early parts of the 21st century. So there you go. And the fact that the public in Russia at this point favors socialism, I would assume, based on what I saw in Russia during the last presidential election, what that means is they argue for more of a social safety net. Because that's what Grudinin, who was the candidate of the Communist Party, Pavel Grudinin, that's what he emphasized in his campaign was, we need more subsidies for education. We need more subsidies for healthcare. We need to provide more of a pension for older folks. And I think when you say these polls in Russia favor socialism, what that means is they probably say that in addition to the way things are, they want more of a social safety net to exist. And that's a debate they're going to have in Russia, right? And I respect the right of the Russian people to determine their own future. And the Communist Party has had some significant gains in recent elections. And there's been some debate, and there's been some shifts, and we'll see what happens. But ultimately, the USA doesn't want to destroy Russia because it's got a strong Communist Party. The United States wants to destroy Russia because it's a competitor. Right? They're furious right now with the fact that Russia is able to have so much influence over the price of oil and gas. That drives them crazy. They're blatantly complaining about this. The fact that Russia and their natural gas and oil, supplies has such an impact on the price. They can't stand it. They want to have the impact on the price. They want to be able to rig the oil prices. They want to be able to rig the natural gas prices. And the fact that Russia can say no, the fact that Biden has to negotiate and the European Union countries have to negotiate with Russia about how much natural gas is put onto the market, they don't like that. They don't like it when other countries have influence. And that's the issue. That's the issue. Favorite color. I usually say red, but that's a little bit stereotypically communist. There are some greens that I really like. There's some blues that I appreciate. There's a shade of every color that is good, and there's a shade of every color that is bad. And that applies to everything in the universe. Everything can become its opposite. I like red, but there are some shades of red that I don't like. I like blue, but there are some shades of blue that I don't like. I like green, but there are some shades of green that I don't like, right? And that everything has the ability to be its opposite. There can be a green that's still a green, but it is far less appealing to my eyes than another green. But they're both still green. So it's something to think about, right? Everything can become its opposite. There you go. There you go. All right. Saif Gaddafi banned from the Libyan elections. Well, that's an outrage. It's an absolute outrage. And it sounds like they wouldn't have banned him if they didn't think he could win. You have to remember Saif Gaddafi. That was Gaddafi's oldest son. And he was somewhat of the moderate and the pro-Western voice in the Libyan government when Gaddafi was in power. He was known to advocate more market reforms. He was known to meet with oppositionists, and he was considered largely to be one of the more pro-Western figures within Gaddafi's government. That said, now that the USA toppled the Libyan government and the country's been in chaos, now he's associated with anti-imperialism, which is interesting. And I think he's aligned with Haftar, the general who betrayed Gaddafi, but is now, kind of a figure. So, I mean, it doesn't surprise me. Libya, look at Libya right now, right? How can anybody say that U.S. regime change operations benefit people? Joe Biden is having this whole conference about democracy, this democracy summit. If you want to refute that whole conference, you just have to shout, Libya! I mean, I wish somebody could, it's going to be online, so it's not even going to be in person, the conference, but somebody just wanted to say this conference is bullshit, they should just shout, Libya! Right? Look how well the democratization of Libya has gone. Or Iraq, or Syria, or Eastern Europe after the fall of the Soviet Union. Name one single place they've made better with their interventions. Name one place that got better because the USA overthrew the government with a color revolution, with an invasion, with a NATO bombing campaign. Name one single place that got better. In Afghanistan, they had 20 years of occupation. Things didn't get better. So, I mean, the next time they come along and they're telling you some heart-wrenching story about, the government in China or the government in Russia or the government in Venezuela is doing this, just tell them to blow it out their ass. Because, I mean, we've heard it so many times. Not one single place has gotten better from a U.S. military intervention. Not one single place has been improved since the United States overthrew their government, invaded, toppled their government, and installed. I mean, not one. There is not one single place that has benefited from a U.S. regime change operation. You can say World War II, but those countries were all Western capitalist developed countries before World War II. It wasn't, the USA didn't invade and topple their governments. It liberated them from the Nazis with the alliance with the Soviet Union, so that doesn't count, right? Someone in the chat said South Korea. Well, the South Korean government already existed. In the USA, it was just, there was a war to reunify the Korean Peninsula, and then it didn't get reunified, right? So neither of those, no. I mean, there's not one example of a U.S. military overthrow or regime change operation that has improved people's lives. Not one. All right. Coastal GasLink pipeline in Canada protests. Well, what that's about at the end of the day is fracking. And it shows that they're trying to build fracking infrastructure. There was the situation with Standing Rock, and there's opposition to it. There's environmental groups, there's indigenous groups, and then there's the fracking companies. And, there's also probably a conflict between big oil and little oil. And the fracking companies are much more right-wing, and the big oil companies are in with the liberals. And, this is playing out, but it's also a situation where the reason the United States desperately wants there to be more oil, and the reason that they want more oil in Canada, the reason that they've pushed fracking so hard is they don't like the fact that countries like Russia and Venezuela and Iran have influence in the international oil markets. And so they want to escalate the oil production domestically in the United States and Canada as much as they possibly can. And so that's why they hate the frackers, but they love the frackers. On the one hand, they need the frackers. On the other hand, they hate the frackers, right? The frackers are competing with the super major oil companies, but with the frackers, that gives the USA more influence over the oil markets. So there you go. Somebody stepped up and volunteered to make my speech, to edit my speech, Oil in the Global Capitalist Crisis, for me, and to edit out the Portuguese translation, so it's just all the way through in English. So I'm going to post that later. So there you go. All right. Xiomara Castro victory in Honduras. It's amazing. It's huge. Honduras had a socialist leader in 2009, Manuel Zelaya, who was toppled in a coup. And then, ever since then, they've had free market regimes. But now the anti-imperialist sentiments and the hunger and the anger on the part of the population was so massive, and the United States has alienated the Honduran deep state so much, and China, China wants to invest in Honduras, and there was just an alignment of forces that made it impossible for them to steal the election. The people of Honduras are hungry and angry and fighting for their rights and mobilizing and fighting for socialism. The United States has alienated elements in the Honduran deep state, number one. And so a lot of the Honduran state was so alienated by the Trump administration and then so alienated by Kamala Harris and the way she conducted herself there that a lot of the Honduran government is not as willing to cooperate with the United States anymore. On top of that, China is willing to invest in Honduras, right? China is a big financial power. Some say China is now the largest economy on earth. So at the end of the day, it just, rigging the elections against Xiomara Castro is something that there was an alignment of forces that enabled this to happen. And this opens up the road to actually stopping the refugee crisis on the border by bringing schools and hospitals and education and infrastructure and electricity and running water to those folks in Honduras. There are people in Honduras who don't have running water and electricity. There are a lot of people in Honduras who don't speak Spanish. They still speak indigenous languages. They're desperately... Socialism is the cure for this. If you compare Nicaragua to Honduras, compare Nicaragua to Guatemala, I mean, socialism clearly works better. And now, if Xiomara Castro can get in there, and if she can actually go full speed and actually change the economy, put in a new constitution like her husband tried to do in 2009 before he was overthrown, if she can actually get in there, put a new constitution in, start changing the military, start moving towards socialism, things could really improve for the people of Honduras. And that would be a fix to the refugee crisis. All these right-wingers want to build a big giant wall. Well, that's not going to solve it. That's not going to solve it. So there you go. All right. Is Russia going to invade Ukraine? No, Russia's not going to invade Ukraine. The United States is escalating and threatening Russia in Ukraine. The United States is threatening to send its military to Russia's Ukraine border. The Ukrainian government is killing civilians and its own population with drone strikes, Turkish-made drones. And so, Russia, there may escalate a situation where Russia has to respond. But Russia's not plotting the invasion of Ukraine. Russian officials have made that abundantly clear. I don't represent Russia or anything like that. I'm a guy on YouTube. But, Russian officials have made it very clear they're not interested in invading Ukraine. And again, what should we be more worried about? Russia and China, or the disaster that capitalism is creating in the United States right now? All right. Do you know any Marxist writers who provide analysis of the Chinese Communist Party over the last 30 and 40 years? Yes. Yes, I do. One of those writers is the guy who wrote When China Rules the World, Martin Jakes, and he wrote a very good analysis of modern China. Another one of those writers, I actually have his book. I can't remember. I just read a lot of it. It's about the Chinese Communist Party. It's very good. I can't remember his name. But it's very, very good. I can also, Harpal Brar has written a book called Socialism with Chinese Characteristics, given his perspective on socialism in China and his feelings and his analysis of socialism with Chinese characteristics. There's a lot that's been published. There's a book called The Rise of a Civilization State. What is it? The China Wave, Rise of a Civilization State. It was a bestseller in China, promoted widely by the Chinese Communist Party. That has great analysis, and it talks about, Deng Xiaoping and how he went to Eastern Europe and how their socialism developed in a way that, the socialism in Eastern Europe could not. That's very good. So there you go. The China Wave by Martin Jakes. That's pretty good. Or the China Wave, The Rise of a Civilization State is very good. I would recommend Martin Jakes, When China Rules the World. There you go. And I would recommend also read the Chinese Communist Party's ideological publication, Kuishe. I'm sure I'm butchering the pronunciation, but they publish a quarterly magazine that has ideological Marxist documents in it, which you can read. And I've got, a number of issues of it, and just read their documents on Confucianism, on socialism, etc. So there you go. I mean, read what they have to say about it. Read what they have to say about it. All right, the Irish Rebellion of 1916, the Easter Rising, the post office, the GPO, right? When James Connolly seized the General Post Office, the Easter Rising, and it was very much a socialist uprising in Ireland in 1916 during World War One. James Connolly he was a member of the Wobblies. He'd been in the IWW in the United States, but he disagreed with them on the national question. He said that the Irish people had the right to fight for their national liberation, and that the struggle of the workers and the struggle of nations for independence walked hand in hand. The IWW, the anarchists, had said that there is no nations, and he said, no, the Irish people are fighting for their nation. James Connolly wrote, he was a Leninist in a lot of ways. I mean, he didn't read Lenin. Lenin never met him, and vice versa. But James Connolly, his understanding of the Irish national question and the working class struggle, and how he combined socialism with national liberation. Oh my God, James Connolly must be a Nazbol, right? But he combined the struggle of national liberation on the part of the Irish people with the struggle to defeat the global system of imperialism and monopoly capitalism. He said, what is it? An English boss is a monster, but an Irish one is worse. James Connolly, yeah, I mean, he wrote, we only want the earth, but our demands most modest are, we only want the earth. James Connolly was a Marxist. He was definitely a Marxist. And, he was killed, and he spent a lot of time in the United States, went back to Ireland. Absolutely. Books on liberation theology. Well, look, okay, so you have to be specific. Now, when you talk about liberation theology, you're specifically referring to a Roman Catholic current that was sympathetic to Marxism, right, in Latin America, mainly in Latin America. It was in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. You had the development of, priests. I believe there was Oscar Romero was one priest. There was a number of priests throughout South and Central America who became sympathetic to Marxism. In the 1980s, there were some priests who served in the Sandinista government of Nicaragua. And liberation theology, the term liberation theology, refers specifically to a Roman Catholic movement. And, there's a good speech about it that was given by, what's his name? Oh, goodness gracious. His name is escaping me. There's a very good speech about the question of liberation theology that was given by Herbert Aptheker. Right? Herbert Aptheker was invited to UCLA, the University of California, Los Angeles. And you can find on YouTube the recording of Herbert Aptheker, who was a member of the Communist Party USA, was one of the most famous African-American historians. And he gave a lecture on the relationship between the Catholic Church and communism in Latin America, and the need to reconcile, and the kind of the Catholic Church's relationship with Marxism. A very good talk that Herbert Aptheker gave. And there are a number of books that have been written. I believe there was even a novel published in the 1930s called Bread and Wine. It's called Bread and Wine. It was about a priest who becomes a socialist or something. But when people, a lot of times when people say liberation theology, they're meaning all Christian socialism, and that's not correct. There, in fact, I would say, first of all, anti-capitalism from a Christian perspective predates capitalism. I mean, the Catholic Church was condemning capitalism as it was beginning. There's a reason money was called filthy lucre, right? They say money is sterile, it's barren metal, etc. But that was not socialism. That was what you could call conservative anti-capitalism. It was. But then, you had at the time. You had the Diggers, for example. There was a group of Protestants during the English Civil War called the Diggers. And the Diggers, they very much believed in, the idea that property was a sin. And they seized St. George's Hill in the year of 1649. They were the Diggers, or the True Levelers. And they had a socialist peasant commune, in England, in St. George's Hill. Um, and I mean, there were Christian socialist movements. All Robert Owen. Now, Robert Owen was critical of mainstream Christianity, but he had some spiritual beliefs. Henry Saint Simon, that's the guy who coined the term socialism, was a French thinker, and he had a very religious perspective. Eugene Debs was a Christian, and Eugene Debs was very religious, and he wrote a beautiful essay, "Jesus, the Supreme Leader," that we republished in our Jesus is a Socialist book. Christian socialism is a very broad topic. Probably the most important Marxist text on Christianity is called The Foundations of Christianity by Karl Kautsky. And it's a history of ancient Rome, it's a history of the Christian church, and it's a history of Judaism and the Jewish people in Palestine at the time of Christ. And it is a Marxist, historical, materialist interpretation of the Christian religion. It's called The Foundations of Christianity. So if you want a Marxist analysis of Christianity, the book that I would recommend the most is Karl Kautsky's Foundations of Christianity. But liberation theology is a very specific topic. So you're talking about a very specific movement. Sorry, I'm just my voice is starting to give out here. That's okay. But anyway, all right. Is there a section of the ruling class that wants nuclear war to stop progress? I wouldn't go that far. There's definitely a section of the ruling class, a very big section, a very powerful section that's Malthusian. There's a very powerful section that is determined to stop the growth of Russia and China by all costs. I haven't seen evidence that they full-on want a nuclear war. I think that they will consider it. They're open to it. They don't have the fear of it that all of us have, but I don't know for a fact that there's people that want a nuclear war and are trying to get one. Okay. Federal debt, who do we owe? Well, that's the thing. When you pay your taxes, you're not literally paying for schools and hospitals. You're paying debt to banks because the government has borrowed from the banks to pay for the schools and hospitals, etc. And that's this game where lending money to the government is this money-making rip-off scheme that the banks have gotten into. And whenever we have a budget crisis, one thing that the government could do is stop bank payments. Now, they could just tell the banks, nope. And the government could also, if they wanted to, and then they say, well, the banks, then they're going to, set our credit rating and we're going to have to pay more interest. No, the government can say no. The government lends the money. The government is the government, right? The government could set its own credit rating. The government could say, all right, if you lend money to the government, we pay it back at this interest rate. And, the government should set its own credit rating. The government should determine at what rate, the banks are paid back. The way the government borrows money is a great example of a rip-off scheme, where the government is constantly in debt to banks. The government pays back loans to bankers at interest. And if there was a budget crisis, just freeze the payments to the banks. Just freeze the payments to the banks. Tell the banks they got to wait. Lower the interest that the banks get, right? That would cause huge amounts of increase in the public budget if we weren't paying as much interest. But the banks have got the government into this rip-off scheme, and it's really unbelievable. And, for every dollar we print, we get in deeper debt. It's all ridiculous. We have a banker's government. And that's why it infuriates me that these bread tube hacks, they say that we can't talk about bankers. They say that's anti-Semitic. Well, no, it's not anti-Semitic. Most elite banking families in the United States are not Jewish. And if you say we're not allowed to talk about bankers, we're not allowed to criticize capitalism. And that's what they're trying to tell us. Every day they come out with a new stupid rule that we all have to follow. They might as well just say, you're not allowed to be a communist. You're not allowed to be a communist. You're not allowed to support this regime. You're not allowed to work with people that oppose gay marriage, even though around the world, a lot of anti-capitalists and anti-imperialists oppose gay marriage. Oh, no, you can't work with people that are opposed to abortion, even though that's all Muslims, basically. So you can't work with the Muslim community. It's... they come out with a new stupid rule every day, a new stupid rule. And we got to not follow these rules. And the second the problem is, a lot of people think, well, I can play ball with these people. I'll follow some of their rules. No, you can't. You just have to tell these people to shove it. All right? Because the second you start kowtowing to them, you lose. Decide what your principles are, what you believe is right, what you believe is wrong. Pick the hill you want to die on and stick to it. You cannot, if they say to you, oh, banker is anti-Semitic, you have to say, no, it's not. No, it's not. I'm not talking about any race. I'm not talking about any religion. I'm talking about financial institutions that lend money, and and leave it at that, right? If they say to you, oh, you can't work with people who are opposed to gay marriage, you say, no, I am going to work with Muslims to protest for Palestine, to protest for civil liberties, to protest against wars, to protest against police brutality and economic justice. And if someone comes to my demonstration and they're a Muslim who is opposed to police brutality and they oppose abortion and gay marriage because it goes against Islam, they're welcome. And the same goes for an Orthodox Jew. The same goes for an evangelical Christian. These people, you cannot play ball with these people. You cannot play ball with these people. The second you give them an inch, you give them a mile, right? And you just have to, if one of these people shows up and they want to play this game, just tell them to shove it, because no. And don't compromise your principles. And that's the dangerous thing, right? Decide what your principles are, right? If you are against bigotry, be clear about it. I'm for gay marriage. I'm for gay marriage. I'm for the right of a woman to have an abortion. I'm for the right of a woman to have an abortion. I'm in favor of gay marriage. I'm opposed to anti-Semitism. I don't think anyone should be hated on the basis of their ethnicity or their religion. I don't buy. I think that the idea that there's some secret Jewish conspiracy controlling the world is wrong, and it's a problematic belief that has led to horrendous events like the Holocaust. I have my principles, okay? I have my principles, but I am not going to adopt the principles of the synthetic left. I'm for gay marriage, but I'll work with people who aren't. I'm for abortion, but I'll work with people who aren't. I reject all forms of bigotry, all anti-Semitism, but if there's working people that are confused about that, I'm not going to spit on them and tell them they're bad people. I'm going to engage with them and try to win them away from that perspective, right? And the same goes for other issues, right? That you have to decide what your principles are. You have to decide what your principles are, and don't let the synthetic left decide it for you. Because basically, at the end of the day, the only people the synthetic left want you to work with is Joe Biden, right? And that's what they're trying to do. And all their cancel culture never applies to Joe Biden. They all lined up, ContraPoints, Vosh, all of them said to vote for Joe Biden, right? You can't work with anyone who's opposed to gay marriage. You can't say banker, that's a secret. But Joe Biden can, talk about super predators, and he can do all kinds of stuff. And that's okay, because he's Joe Biden. That's who they work for. Right? They are pro-imperialist hacks, and don't play ball with them. The second you play ball with them, they win. How do we advocate for communism and modern monetary theory, MMT? Okay. Modern monetary theory is like the idea that the government could print money and give it to people, right? Instead of, the government could pump money into the economy and give it to people. And it's interesting. It's certainly an interesting theory. I'm not like straight up opposed to it, but I don't think it's going to solve the problem. The problem is ultimately capitalism. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think that, with the government printing money, it doesn't just have to just give it to banks, right? I mean, the way the Federal Reserve printing money operates, it's interesting. Books exposing anti-communism. Well, one good book exposing anti-communism. What's this? Reminded when you criticize the military-industrial complex. Okay, whatever. Yeah, people call me all kinds of things. Right. Books exposing anti-communism. Black Shirts and Reds by Michael Parenti is very good. It talks about how the fall of the Soviet Union was a disaster. Talks about the roots of fascism and fascism being rooted in capitalism. That's a very good book by Michael Parenti. Black Shirts and Reds. What other books exposing anti-communism? The Stalin Era by Anna Louise Strong is it is an explanation of what life was like under Stalin's leadership from the perspective of an American journalist who was living in the Soviet Union at that time. Very, very important book, The Stalin Era. And that that will give you an insight into the anti-Stalin, narrative that we get, the anti-Soviet narrative. That'll give you another perspective. What other books exposing anti-communist lies are good? Oh goodness. That's the thing. I try to write in a very to the point way. I try to, but there's a lot of like academic studies of socialist countries, etc., that give you another perspective, but they don't just straight up answer the lies. And that's what we need to develop at the Center for Political Innovation. It's just some like straight up to the point literature. I'm all for that. All right, best books on Marxist philosophy. Okay, so, where to begin? Where to begin? There was a great pamphlet that was written, and I wish it was online somewhere. But there was a great pamphlet written by Hillel Cohen, who was a leader of the Workers' World Party. And he wrote a great document called Reason and Change. And I don't think it's online anywhere. It might be. And if it's online, it would be great, because it's a great explanation of dialectical materialism. And the leaders of the Workers' World Party tried to suppress it because he wasn't part of the clique. But it was published by the Workers' World Party in the 1980s, the early 1980s. And you can probably find it online. There's a PDF of it online somewhere. Reason and Change by Hillel Cohen is very good. But what else? What other writings on historical and dialectical materialism are there that it would be good? I mean, it comes in anything that it's from a Marxist perspective is going to talk about that stuff. I mean, I like the textbooks, like the Fundamentals of Marxism-Leninism, which is an old Soviet textbook. The first, chapter is all about dialectical materialism. In the History of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, there's a chapter on dialectical materialism that was written by Stalin. And actually, if you read Stalin's book, Marxism or Anarchism, the first section is all about dialectical materialism. I'm trying to think what other books. There's a very good book published by international publishers called Dialectical Materialism. It's very, very good. Caleb, what you well-meaning intellectuals don't understand is the majority of the conversation has to be emotional and cultural. Historiography is beneficial to us, but it's meaningless in the face of mythological ideology. Patrick, I don't know what you mean. I am very emotional. And let me just say, Patrick, I'll just react to that now before I move on to the next one. One of my critiques of Marxism is Marxist groups, there is this lack of emotion. And I'll honestly, I think that comes from the bourgeois revolution. Because at the time of the bourgeois revolution, science, scientific thinking was the bold new way of doing things, right? During the Protestant Reformation, they took music out of churches. They took stained glass windows out of churches because they wanted to just believe the Bible, right? Ulrich Zwingli, the leader of the Swiss Reformed Church, was all about, and if you look at the way a lot of the bourgeois revolutionaries operated, right? There was this desire to reject emotions, to reject passion, and to be scientific. And there was a logic to it because feudalism had depended on this kind of emotional loyalty to spiritual forces and man's quote unquote natural superiors. And so the bourgeois revolutionaries, in many cases, especially the Protestants, made a big point of trying to not be emotional, right? I mean, you talk about, Oliver Cromwell didn't believe in Christmas dinner, right? He thought Christmas dinner was sinful. You should spend Christmas thinking about God, not eating a big meal. And that a big part of the bourgeois revolution against feudalism was trying to replace the passionate emotional rituals of feudalism with scientific reason. I don't know if you know this, but this is pretty wild. But the death penalty, for example, in feudalism, the death penalty is carried out in this very emotional way. You have a ceremony, and they're like, they're cutting someone's head off. They're playing the drum, and it's this big elaborate killing ritual. In the Soviet Union, when they executed people, they just shot them. And in some cases, they made a point of not having the person know they were going to die. They talked about the long walk, where the person, they take the person out of their cell. They think they're going somewhere, and then they pull their gun out and just shoot them in the back of the head. So the person doesn't even see it coming. It's just, that kills them, right? And the idea was that, that you were taking the emotion, the guillotine, for example. In the French Revolution, they invented the guillotine. Now, we think of the guillotine as being this awful killing device, but the reason the guillotine was invented was because it would be less painful, and it would be less of this elaborate ritual. It's not this elaborate killing ritual where we're cutting you in 4 pieces and reading it was just kind of bring them up there, off their head, next. It was just kind of, there was this feeling that what was wrong with feudalism was that it was overly emotional and overly spiritual. And it was better to replace feudalism with science. And the more cold you can be, the more rational you can be, it'll make things healthy. The Victorian mindset is a lot like that, right? And that's in Victorian times, they were all about suppress your emotions, suppress your sexual desires, the stiff upper lip attitude. It was very much about controlling passion. And because communist governments, in Russia and in China, they overthrew feudalism. Russia was largely, it was semi-feudal. There was some capitalism in Russia. It was largely feudal at the time. They wanted to be scientific. And in China, they overthrew feudalism. They wanted to be scientific. I just need to qualify, well-meaning intellectual is not an insult. I understand, Patrick. But so, and I've noticed this as I've traveled around the world. One thing about communists, usually I like communists around the world better than I like communists in the United States. But one thing I will say about communists around the world is if you ever go around the world, to any official communist party, official, bona fide communist party, not, the Progressive Revolutionary Socialist Party, not the Sandinistas. No, if you go to the event of the official Communist Party, the politics often is pretty good. They're consistently anti-imperialist and all that, but you will be bored as shit, right? It's like going to an Anglican church service or something. It's it's a lot of very dull, I am getting up and reading the speech on behalf of the third committee of the, you don't get passionate oratory. You don't get music. You don't get, because there's this desire, this feeling, well, we don't want to be corrupted by the passions. They associate passion, heavy speeches and they associate passion and strong emotions with feudalism, and they're trying to be scientific. But honestly, I think that needs to be rediscussed. I used to joke, that one of the worst things about communist meetings is that, in the United States, even still, you go to a communist event, it's just speech after speech after speech. And often the speeches are written out, for God's sakes. The speeches are not performed. They're written out. It's person after person getting up and reading from a piece of paper. And it's infuriating, right? You cannot have a public meeting without music. Sometimes you have no choice, right? We had a conference in California, and the musician just couldn't come the first day. He came the next day, and it helped. But he couldn't be there the first day. But, we had our event in Pennsylvania, and there was we 100% made sure to have a musician there. You can't have a public meeting without music. And the speeches have to be delivered. You can have notes in front of you, fine, but you can't read your speech, right? You can read maybe a statement or a letter from somebody or something, but if someone's giving a long talk, if someone's speaking for more than 15 minutes, they have to, it has to be lively. They have to be looking at the audience. They have to be interacting with the audience. Think about, I'm with you to some degree, Leslie. Is that what the person's name was? Leslie? Patrick Leslie? Patrick Leslie. I'm with you on that, right? And that emotions, passion, these things are very important. And that there has been a neglect of these things. There's a kind of dullness that a lot of communists have, and it needs to be overcome. There needs to be music. There needs to be passionate speeches, etc. All right. Is revolutionary violence inevitable? Well, who's to say what's inevitable, okay? The main thing is that we do not advocate violence, and that's very important. We want a peaceful transition to socialism. The ruling class will decide whether or not violence is inevitable, because if they do not allow the democratic process to go forward, then they attack the people, and they violently suppress them, and they move toward fascism to prevent the people from mobilizing to build socialism. The people will have to defend themselves. But that is up to the ruling class. That is up to the ruling class. It's not up to us. And it's important that we don't fall into the trap. This is a trick that social democrats like to use. It's a trick that police provocateurs like to use. They want to trick you into saying you advocate violence so they can arrest you, so they can accuse you of being an extremist. They can link you to violent acts that happen, and don't fall for it. Don't get backed into that corner. We want peace. We want a peaceful democratic transition to socialism, and if the ruling class doesn't allow it, that's their decision. And don't let them trick you. This is the common trick that is used to discredit communists by liberals, by police provocateurs, by fascists. Don't fall for it. Stick to your point, which is we want a peaceful transition to socialism. We advocate a peaceful transition to socialism. We want, to get socialists elected. We want to ratify a new socialist constitution. We want to make the country better with socialism. We don't advocate violence. We don't advocate civil war. We love this country. We love average Americans, and socialism will make their life better. If you can't say that, you're not a communist, okay? All of this, burn it down, tear it down, you're a Euro settler, that is not Marxism. That is pessimism, that is destructive, and it's toxic. If you're a Marxist, you love your country, you love your community, and the way to make your country better is with socialism. You don't want a civil war. You want a peaceful transition to a rational socialist society. You want a new state to emerge, a socialist state. You do want to dissolve the Pentagon. You do want to get rid of the CIA. You do want to get rid of the FBI and the policing agencies. You do want to set up a new state. We should be clear about that. It's not simply a matter of changing elected officials. We want a whole new state, a whole new society. We want the whole country to be reborn. But we do not want violence. We have to be very clear about that, and don't let them trick you into saying you want violence, because that's a way to discredit you. That's a trap. It's a trap. All right, professional managerial class. Look, okay, so there's a book called The Managerial Revolution. There was a Trotskyite named James Burnham. He was a Trotskyite who became one of the third camp Trotskyites, broke with Trotsky. He had a theory that there was a new class that had emerged that was neither capitalists nor workers. They were managers. And this managerial class, that's who ruled the USSR. That's who ruled Nazi Germany. It was neither capitalist nor socialist. And that was a big theory in the 1930s. There was a theory that there was this new class emerging called the managerial class. They were neither capitalists nor workers. They were this third class, and that they had taken power. And it's very easy to debunk. The corporations that these professional managerials work for all function to make profits for shareholders. All those shareholders have the power to fire all those professional managerials. It's still capitalism. It's still private ownership of the means of production. But there is a group of people who are paid to manage capitalism, and that exists, right? There's people whose job it is to manage capitalism. What super chat did I miss? All right. And that's the professional managerial. Well-meaning intellectual is not an insult. I saw that, Patrick. I saw that. I don't think I missed that super chat. But professional managerials, at the end of the day, they're functionaries in capitalism, right? You hire a manager to run your company. Professionals, right? Lawyers. And in some cases, lawyers, doctors are proletarians, right? If you work at a big hospital, you work at a big law firm, you're being exploited for your labor. Now, if you have your own practice, you're petty bourgeois because you have your own practice. But, a lot of doctors are proletarians. A lot of lawyers are proletarians. Now, obviously, they have a skill, and they're very high paid because they're in demand. But at the end of the day, and technically, okay, they could have their own practice. They could have their own practice if they wanted it. But there you go. All right, folks. My voice is given out and it's late, but I think we'll probably do this again tomorrow night, if I'm not mistaken. I think I'll be able to do this tomorrow night. So we'll do this again tomorrow night. So my best wishes to everybody. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night.